Hey everybody, Simon Dixon here. You recently may have heard me losing my shit on a few X spaces, and the videos kind of made their way. I love it on X when people start creating memes and cartoons and pull out clips and everything. I've been sharing those because I try to take it in good humor, even though the subject is a real red line for me, and I don't find it a subject to laugh about. Um, you know, the genocide in Gaza, the Holocaust that's happening right now, the mass starvation campaign that the entire world has now recognized, with the exception of America. And even Trump just came out and said the starvation is awful. Obviously, the usual lies and propaganda and spin is applied to it that we're so used to right now in covering up for the genocide that's happening. And as you know, I always talk about the hierarchy of structure in the proof of weapons network. Many people believe that Israel controls America because of many of the blackmail operations like Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein, his handler, was Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a Mossad super agent. But I've covered this, and you can check out my other blogs on Trump's connection to Epstein using Ryan Dawson's work, and answering the question of, what's going on there. I've got a couple of blogs on that topic with all the further reading that you may need if you want to dive into that topic. But the point is that when you look at the real structure, my personal belief is that Israel is simply an American colony with plausible deniability, whereby whenever the crimes against humanity that American corporations like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, Palantir, and many other of the companies that receive the feeder Silicon Valley companies like Google, Meta, basically there is a complex structure that occurs between Silicon Valley companies that are funded by divisions of the CIA venture arm, and they get military technology. And often, when the technology is too controversial or would not fly within some of the rules within America, you feed it out to a technology company within Israel, and then they can beta test it in the Middle East, like genocide as a service in Gaza, occupation as a service in West Bank, and things like integration with drones in Ukraine, and many of the surveillance technology that's happening across the European Union, UK, including crowd control in Saudi Arabia and various other technologies that are beta tested. And then when they would be complete at risk of being sued under the US legal system, you can sell them via Israel. And then if these technologies work out, they're gobbled up and acquired back into the US, where companies like Google and Meta and some of the large military companies end up acquiring. And so it acts as like a laundering and feeder operation. But the profits end up in US stocks at the end of the day. The money doesn't stay within Israel. And when you need plausible deniability, you get to, rather than those military companies being sued, they are US corporations, and they kind of have a bit of a story. So if everything goes wrong, America and Europe, as it historically has done, you can weaponize religion to recruit an army in Israel through IDF. They have to engage in the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians. There is forced conscription where you have to join the IDF. And you can use, billionaires, maybe wealthy billionaires in the America, can fund organizations like AIPAC, and then you have military lobbying and banking lobbying, and you have this complex mechanism for controlling Congress, for controlling Senate, and when needed, maybe even control over judicial through these blackmail operations, and then, even to the extreme of human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, and even sexual blackmail operations, as is being covered up right now. And so that's the relationship as I see it from within the Proof of Weapons network. And Mossad, CIA, and MI6 are deeply connected in these operations. And obviously, when you're dealing with criminal organizations, because we've often covered the history of the CIA when it came from Operation Paperclip, which was a operation with Nazi Germany through Alan Dulles, who was also connected to the Bank for International Settlements that funded Nazi Germany. And there was a merger and partnership as a result of that with the Italian mafia, and then the Jewish mob as well, and the Jewish mafia. And when I say Jewish mafia, people try and misquote that as if I'm talking about all Jews. Well, you've seen my blog where I covered debunking the myths of do all Jews rule the world? And so they try to play the anti-Semitic card. And you'll notice that there are various operations. If you read Operation Mockingbird, which was a CIA operation that led to the creation of words like conspiracy theory, and where when someone gets close to the truth, they release some of the data, but not enough to get to the full place. And there are psychological operations, and having been involved in campaigning against the genocide in Gaza, it's been exposed throughout the whole thing that there are people that are paid in order to come up on spaces, in order to derail, confuse, and spout propaganda. Israel, many of the documents were exposed in Israeli media around some of their operations, like the Hannibal Directive, where they killed their own on October the 7th, and the significant budget that was put behind paying social media influencers, and a very deliberate target was X Spaces. And so, based upon my background from being involved in the Gaza genocide and many of the operatives that were exposed over time, and we had them exposed over time, we had these people that were very prominent members of the community. It came out that they were compromised and connected to Ponzi schemes and scams. And it's why you always have criminals, because the people that they recruit for these operations tend to be people where they are compromised already. It's why I believe every politician it only gets into a position of power if there's compromise. And so they use this in order to have a foothold. And so you always see these exposures, and we saw it throughout X Spaces. There were many people where their crimes were exposed, and whether it be sexual violence or Ponzi schemes or financial crimes and various other things. Anyway, all this to say is that after 650 days of being involved in the anti-genocide movement, the anti-war movements, you become pretty skeptical. And when you go as deep as I do, where you actually read all of the books on how these operations were set up with the specific declassified documents, it's very difficult to come up on a space, explain things when the vast majority of the world are so far away from the red pill that I've had to swallow, because I was a very normal person. I wasn't inclined. I mean, my whole background was I started figuring out how banking worked, and that led me down many different rabbit holes over time. And I read at least 2 books every week, so I read a lot. And so when I want to try and find something, I find the best experts in the field that have dedicated their whole life, because I spent 25 years on my topic of Bitcoin investing money. Well, Bitcoin obviously came for 14 years. But prior to that, I was a monetary reformer, and I know what it's like to spend 25 years of your life going deeper and deeper into one topic. So I try to find other people that have done that, whether it be in the case of Epstein with Ryan Dawson, or whether it be Operation Gladio and the formation of the CIA and the money laundering through Vatican Bank, with Paul Williams, or, more recent, like Whitney Webb with things like Palantir, and Peter Thiel and Trump and their connections to Epstein and various other things. And so you can't be an expert on everything, but I can follow the money, and I've developed a methodology, an understanding of the world that I call the proof of weapons network, and a methodology for following the money and using game theory, based upon studying the work of the experts and then putting together likely scenarios, which I cover every week on Bitcoin Hard Talk. So all of this to say that I have a red line, and when it comes to laughing or mocking about the genocide in Gaza, the starvation campaign, and the Holocaust that we're currently witnessing right now, having witnessed and having lost so many that I've been communicating with over X Spaces, people that I built online friendships with, I've seen them. I know people who have had their family massacred, who are the victims of sexual violence from Israeli soldiers. And so all of that, having also watched every single day these footage of mass brutality, of children, women, this starts to play an impact on your psychology. Now, I think I'm very psychologically strong. I live in a very peaceful environment. Bitcoin gave me the financial freedom, but it obviously has its toll. And so when somebody pushes the wrong lever and starts laughing because maybe they don't know as much about the subject, and then they portray a version of events that is intelligence operations version of events and propaganda. Obviously, I can lose my shit sometime. And one example is this space. Now, I believe in putting it all out there. Like, we're experiencing this journey together. We're documenting the journey of experiencing a real-time Holocaust genocide, and radically changing world. And in years to come, our grandchildren will listen to this. Imagine if you were alive during World War II, and you weren't just going to the cinema or reading the newspaper. You were actually able to communicate with Germans, Russians, and people all across Europe. And you were all put together in this one environment, and you were listening to the German propaganda, the British propaganda, the American propaganda, the Russian propaganda. And you were able to kind of deconstruct it and understand that we're fed narratives and they're radically different to the justifications, but behind the whole thing is a profit motive, and money and power shifts. And anyone that studied World War I and World War II, that the same Wall Street banksters funded both the Bolshevik revolution that led to the creation of the Soviet Union and the communist ideology, was the same people that created the Federal Reserve in order to remove capitalism from America and replace it with a debt-based Ponzi scheme that the Bank of England did in the UK, to the British Empire. And you also know that the same Wall Street financiers via the Bank for International Settlements were funding Nazi Germany, and the rise of Hitler. And they create scenarios where they benefit from all three, and then they rewrite history for the people, and the winners of wars, quote unquote, winners, end up rewriting history, and then they infiltrate university and college systems, and it becomes a part of an ideology connected to a state or a country. And never is that more prevalent in America. Americans have been fed a version of history, and they parrot things like the greatest country in the world. And I have no problem with that. But I do have a big problem with calling yourself the greatest country in the world while simultaneously covering up and engaging in a Holocaust. And you either own it or you don't. You have to own what is happening and be proud of that, and then call yourself the greatest country. But you don't get to call yourself the greatest country and pretend that what's really happening that makes you not so great isn't happening. And so that's what really is the trigger point for me. And so I joined a space, and a bunch of people were talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And I joined the conversation to add what I had, and entered into a gaslighting phase where apparently I derail. Everyone's allowed to talk about what they consider to be things that are acceptable to talk about. But apparently when I cover what I believe to be the truth, and source it, I go through with a couple of lawyers, one that is ideologically aligned with Zionism and another lawyer from the Bitcoin community, whose primary clients are probably banks and insurance companies. And so I asked a few questions around who pays their bills, what they're aligned to. I've spent so much time to become completely as independent as I can. Bitcoin gave me financial freedom. I needed no Silicon Valley money in order to create my company. And so I've distanced myself from as many agendas as possible. But I always use the same methodology in trying to understand. And if all of your clients are banks and financial institutions, there is an acceptable narrative that you have to adopt, particularly when you're doing business in America. And we spent a lot of time to break down the barriers of being able to call out the genocide without immediately being called anti-Semitic or a conspiracy theorist, or now the new word is a doomer. But these are words to censor you, to discredit you, as per Operation Mockingbird. And so I've grown a bit of a, once you've been doing this for a long time, you get used to it. And I believe the very first time I discussed this with one particular person, Joe Calasari, his immediate reaction was to call me anti-Semitic the first time I discussed some of these things. After that, he continually mocks me for engaging in conspiracy theories. I give him books to go off and read. He doesn't read it. He just goes and reads a blog and looks for what's wrong with it, and then use that as a way to discredit it and pretends or makes out like he's read the book. The final thing now is doomerism. So apparently trying to point out how the world is right now so that people can put together an effective plan based upon reality is doomerism. And I'm sorry, I'm not the one that is doing the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, and Holocaust. And to me, what we have to go through in experiencing the Holocaust and helping people understand what's actually happening is a tiny, tiny thing relative to those that are actually experiencing it themselves. And so I personally believe we are on a spiritual journey. I do believe that we will all be judged by our Creator for how we reacted. And I believe our grandchildren are going to listen to this documentation of these spaces, which I'm so meticulously making sure that I have backups on all my blogs, because I think this is going to make up the learning of history. And I think our children in the future are going to have to understand, how did we allow this to happen? If you could go back and understand, how did the previous Holocaust during World War II happen? And how was it rewritten and weaponized? If we had documented the whole thing without the propaganda, we would have a radically different understanding of the world as we understand it today, which would change our actions. And there can only ever be peace when we have the truth, is my belief. So with that in mind, that was my little intro, but I just wanted to document this space so that you could learn from all of these tactics being used in real time: denial, mockery, and trying to make someone look silly, and then using all of these doomerism, conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism, in real time. So maybe this will be an educational experience for you. But I don't apologize for my passion. I believe that sometimes you got to express things in a manner that has the full passion of the severity of the situation. And right now, we are in a severe situation. Even our governments in UK and France, which are fully compromised, they're having to come out and say, if you don't end this starvation campaign by September, we're going to recognize Palestine as a state. How crazy is that? You have to commit a Holocaust in order to recognize a state when there was a history of just plonking Israel on top of Palestine through settler colonialism, rewriting history. And what would you do to protect what you call, quote unquote, Western values? What would you do to protect your life, your liberty, your freedom, and your property rights if somebody came into your land and your home and tried to claim that this land and this home is now ours and engage in sexual violence with your family? You know what you'd do. You'd firstly hope that the First Amendment would give you the freedom of speech to talk about it. And secondly, you'd hope that the Second Amendment and your ability to protect and defend yourself and resist would be used, because you would do anything. You would be a resistance movement against those stealing your life, liberty, freedom, and property rights. And that is exactly what happened. But for some reason, we're told through this parallel history and brainwashing and the weaponization of religion that the Palestinians don't get to resist and protect their life, liberty, and freedom. And in other podcasts, and content, I'll go through the weaponization of the word terrorism and the confusion around the funding of CIA organizations and Mossad organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda in order to confuse you. I've covered that many times. But anyway, enjoy the space. I hope it's a learning experience. And I'm just documenting here in history, the types of things that you have to go to if you want to stand up for what you believe to be right once you take the red pill and become well-read and understand the things that I cover each and every week in Bitcoin Hard Talk, when I cover this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics, and on my blog on simondixon.com. So enjoy the space. And one final thought before you do that: this is what Bitcoin was created for. And while we've got all of these bankers and it's changed the world and it's become a world asset class, currently over $2.3 trillion, I was there. Bitcoin was a resistance against banking. Bitcoin was a resistance against funding wars. It was an exit and an opt-out. And no matter how much you try and rewrite history, thankfully on my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, I wish that I had documented more. But from before Bitcoin, I was documenting my journey in monetary reform, and even have the YouTube video of my presentation at the original Bitcoin conference, and everything in between. So I also back it up in case I get banned from YouTube, on podcasts and on the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal at simondixon.com. Okay, that's enough of my rambling. I'll see you. I hope you enjoy the X-Space recording and learn from it. And sorry for losing my shit in advance. No, I don't apologize. I lose my shit because it was warranted.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking into, well, a really intense online debate. It started in finance, but quickly spiraled into geopolitics, trust, power, the works.
Yeah, it's centered around Simon Dixon, the Bitcoin and alternative finance pioneer. We're digging into his take on an X space he was in.
Right, an X space that's like a live chat on X used to be Twitter. And Dixon wrote about it, connecting financial systems, real-world stuff, and why he thinks Bitcoin is fundamentally about peaceful resistance.
So our goal here is to unpack that, see how following the money, as he puts it, can reveal some surprising things, and why sometimes the personal gets, well, very geopolitical.
Okay, so let's set the scene. This X space. Dixon says it pretty quickly moved away from its original topic.
Right. Apparently it started somewhere else entirely, but landed on this fundamental clash about trust.
Yeah, you had lawyers like Joe Carlosar and Zach Shapiro arguing that, look, the world's complex. You kind of have to trust subject matter experts. Doing your own research doesn't always cut it.
Which is a fair point in many ways. But it raises that big question for you listening. Who do you trust when there's just so much information, so many narratives?
And Dixon came in with a completely different angle, didn't he? Based on his, 25 years looking at money and power.
Exactly. His counter was simple: follow the money. He basically suggests powerful people often have their stances dictated by who's funding them, that they might be compromised.
He even called it out directly in the space, asking Tanalists about their clients.
He did, and he framed it not as like a personal attack, but as crucial context. Conflicts of interest, right? It ties straight into that core Bitcoin idea. Don't trust, verify.
So a real clash of philosophies on how to even find truth.
Absolutely. One side saying trust the experts, the other saying verify the incentives.
Then things apparently got tense. Dixon talks about hitting a red line.
Yeah, he says it happened when he brought up what he described as the ongoing U.S.-funded genocide in Gaza. He refused to let it be brushed aside.
And the reaction was pushback, telling him it's anti-American propaganda or just talk Bitcoin.
That's what he recounts. And he points to this as a tactic using labels like conspiracy theorist or, anti-Semitic to shut down difficult topics.
He mentioned a specific exchange with Zach Shapiro.
Right. Dixon says Shapiro stated he didn't see it as genocide and saw Hamas as the bad guy. For Dixon, this interaction was revealing. He connects it to what he calls the proof of weapons network.
Proof of weapons network, meaning?
He essentially argues it's a system, a network that profits from conflict, from war and destruction. And he saw that disagreement as exposing that network's influence, in his view.
So, okay, how does he tie that explosive idea back to Bitcoin? Why is it relevant?
Because for Dixon, separating Bitcoin from geopolitics is just wrong. He argues Bitcoin was made for this exact situation. It's resistant.
Resistance against what specifically?
Against the financial institutions, the systems, that he believes fund these wars. He talks about being at the very first Bitcoin conference. And the feeling was us versus the banks. Bitcoin was designed, he says, as an exit.
An opt-out.
Yeah, an opt-out from what he calls a corrupt banking system that props up the U.S. dollar with war, death, destruction, and violence. Strong words.
So for him, Bitcoin isn't just like digital gold or an investment. It's a practical tool.
A tool for peaceful protest. That's key. Boycott the Fed by saving outside their system. Boycott BlackRock using self-custody, not EPFs. Boycott banks by not borrowing against Bitcoin. Even boycotting the war machine through conscious spending.
It's a freedom technology then. More about principle than price swings.
That's his core message. It's a way to fight back, peacefully, using finance itself.
Now, there was something that happened after this X-Space finished, wasn't there? A kind of postscript?
Right. Dixon mentioned that during the debate, his opponents argued nobody could really know the ground truth in Gaza.
Yeah.
Well, shortly after, a video came out from Tucker Carlson. It featured a whistleblower, retired U.S. Green Beret Elteen Cole, Tony Aguilar.
Okay.
Aguilar was apparently part of something called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, and was on the ground. He reportedly confirmed witnessing horrific war crimes.
Wow. And Dixon saw this as
validation. He highlighted it as evidence supporting his own earlier statements, where he'd characterized the GHF as a U.S.-funded operation perpetrating a Holocaust. He points out this info came out after the debate.
So looking at this whole episode through Simon Dixon's lens, it really paints a picture of money, power, and global events being, deeply connected.
Definitely. It pushes you to think about personal responsibility when faced with these huge, complex geopolitical situations, and whether something like Bitcoin can actually function as that peaceful resistance he talks about.
It leaves you with some big questions, doesn't it? In this world flooded with information, with influence, how do you decide who or what to trust?
And what part do your own financial choices play? Is that Bitcoin mantra, don't trust, verify, just a technical thing for crypto geeks? Or is it maybe, just maybe, a broader guide for navigating, everything, something to think about?